Good morning. Kumla Ablat Gemara. We are up to Daf Ayin Ches Amid Aleph. So basically, we had a Mishnah. On the Mishnah told us that if you had, let's say, blood of a carbon, you had to sprinkle, and it got mixed up with water. So the question is, can you use it or not? And because maybe the blood is, loses its status. We say it depends. If it still appears like blood, it's all right. If it appears like if it's very very light colored like water, that's not all right. Then we ask, what happens if the blood got mixed up with wine? If blood got mixed with wine, so really you can't tell because they're both the same color. Then we imagine the quantity of wine that was there. Had it been water, what would it have been? And then if still would have retained the color of blood, then it's blood. If it wouldn't, it wouldn't. And what happens if it got mixed up with the blood of an animal or chulin? It's mamish identical. Again, we imagine that blood is water, and so on. And Rabbi Yehuda says,
you're not going to go by color.
Sorry?
You can't discern by color.
No, we imagine that the blood of the, let's say, the chulin is water, and if there would have been enough water there that it would have removed.
How can you tell how much blood of chulin there is?
Oh, let's say you knew. You had there's a measuring cup. There's a measuring cup that you already had dam chulin there, and then you add, let's say, we're assuming that you knew. Yeah. And Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He holds that min b'mina, says that both blood, on the contrary, they reinforce each other. Even if you have one little drop, it still will be good enough. Of good blood, it will be good enough because it's min b'mina. Okay, that's what we learned then. But then we did say the second half of the mission was that in certain instances we don't use the blood at all, we toss it away, which we'll learn later in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, the Gemara, when is all of this said? That if it appears like blood, even after if it was water, it's good, is kosher, let's say the first case where blood got mixed with the water. And we said that if the blood loses its color, it's no good. When do we say that? If the water fell into the blood. Okay. But if the blood fell into the water, then every drop of blood that fell in first is as if it disappeared, because we isolate each drop from the next drop. So what do you call it? Then and there's definitely a lot more water than the little bit of blood that comes in every single instant. Therefore, it's no good. The blood is completely in this bottle, and you cannot use this blood. No, but even though it looks like blood, it doesn't help us. Because it's every every drop that came in, every drop landed in this bottle, if the blood came in afterwards. However,
what we came into one big slug.
So yesterday we let in taste, but if you send it in a big amount, shefarav, if you do it in one flow, not pouring very slowly, but one gush, you open up a big wide opening and the whole thing gushes out one go, then we don't say that. Kama bottle is if you pour the normal way of pouring. Sure. However, when it comes to mitzvahs, he says, "Abel nafel." When it comes to kisi adam, the din is that if you have blood of a chicken, that you have to go ahead, let's say, and you have to cover it with sand and make a brach of kisi adam. So he says it by that if the blood was poured into something else, let's say into water, nevertheless, as long as it appears like blood, you're chayiv the mitzvah kisi adam, even though you're pouring it slowly. So we should say kama bottle or risha bottle. We don't say that. Why not? Only by kachim we say the idea that it was been rejected. By mitzvahs we say, okay, the first drop came in, imagine that it was in this bottle, but when the next drop came in, never you take the aggregate, and if the aggregate looks like blood, we say by mitzvahs chazer v'nira, that it comes back, that you're able to do it again. Okay, says the Gemara, Amar Reish Lakish. So the two dots. Amar Reish Lakish says, Hapigul, if you have the following, you have a kazayis of pigul, which means that you had in mind that the animal should be eaten outside the normal time. So even if you eat it within the time, you're not allowed to get an isra of kara. So you had a kazayis there, a pigul, and you had a kazayis of noiser. Some are not goyres and tamei a third kazayis. Let's say even two kazayis, one a pigul, one a noiser. You mix to do a kazayis from this and a kazayis from this. You have two averis and you mix the two together. And now you're warned you better not eat it because it's alive. You're not allowed to eat the pigul. You're not allowed to eat the noise. It is that physically that if this meat was left over beyond its due date, so you're not allowed to eat it. And you're warned. Chayv Kaddish, if you're warned, you get malchus. And you ate it, you are potter. You are potter. Now, noise is a lam hanitig say. So according to many, you don't get malchus anyway. So you also have tameh here. So let's say a pigul and you have tameh, or according to one of the lam say you get malchus. Potter, you are potter. Now, why are you potter for malchus? So he says it following. That what happens is when you're chewing this meat, they're mixed together. So the way Rashi explains very nicely. As you're chewing, you take let's say you chew a half a kazayis at a time. There's 2 kazayis in total. You chew, let's say, a half a kazayis at a time. In that half a kazayis is a mixture, let's say, of noiser and of pigul, or tameh and pigul, right? There's a mixture of the two. But the mixture is not 50-50. Every bite that you take, there might be 40%, let's say, of pigul and 60% of tameh, or 60% of noiser. The meat, the 40% of pigul now is batul legabe the roiv of noiser, and it takes on the identity of noiser. So now you have a half a kazayis of noiser, and that mixture that you have in there of pigul is gone. So now suddenly the pigul is no longer kazayis in this whole pile. But then you take another bite, and that particular bite there might be more pigul than noiser, then it's all the way around. Then the noiser disappears. And we never know, and it's impossible to be impossible to be exact. So therefore, one of them you're going to be eating more than the kazayis, and one of them you're being, we have 2 exact kazayim, and one of them you're going to be eating less than the kazayis, and you don't get malchus if you ate less than the kazayis, even though chatzah is forbidden. So therefore, you don't get malchus. That's how Rashi learns. Now this is a very Yisraeli Rashi. The Teiras Chesed in his Chuvas talks about Richase and the Achreim talk about it, but they don't actually bring this place. But you say that what happens, this is the real question. What happens if you ate a kazay, let's say there was a treif, and a little bit of kosher went in this, everyone says, of course, that you're not allowed to eat any part of it. Together, the combination is exactly a kazayis. But 10% of that was kosher meat that joined this thing here. So now you have a kazayis in total. 90% of a kazayis is treif, and 10% of kazayis is mutter, but you're not allowed to eat it because it's bottle and everything. The head is bottle here to the east, it becomes also. You get malchus. Did you eat a kazayis of treif here? Or do we say the heter remains heter, but you're not allowed to eat it? How do we view this? Comes Rashi here, and Rashi says that the lesser, let's say the pigul is 40% of it, and the nicer 60%, the pigul takes on the identity of the nicer. It's so, but it's not always pigul. It takes on the identity of the roiv. So when you have a little bit of heter together with a lot of iser,
You have a kazayis.
yeah, because I iser, you get malchus. That's what will come out according to Rashi. Taisus very strenuous, stridently argues with this whole nekuda. He says no such thing that the isi, you're not allowed to eat it, but to say that it becomes takes on the identity and you get malchus for it, no such thing. And therefore he learns a whole different pshat over here, a whole different pshat in this mixture. But that's how Rashi learns. So it becomes now this very machlek, this yisoid, it had to transforms to iser when it's a bottle there or not. Is a machlek is Zevachim Daf. This is the yisoid here. Rashi versus Taisus.
Another version of Fatih.
Yeah, but it should check.
There's hot and there's
Yeah, but we're talking about malchus. We're not talking about this. We're talking about iser, and either both will say that you're not allowed to eat it. It's just you get malchus. Does the mamish take on the identity or not? The question is does heter have an identity, or heter means it's just not us? And that's really what this is how the Achronim take the next step. If heter has an identity, no, there's 2 identities. You're either usher, which is a tzir, has a certain framework, and heter is also a metzias. Heter is not the lack of iser. Anything which is not usher is mutter. Heter means that there's some, like it comes from, like Tanya says, it comes from klipas noiga, not for gimel klipas meis. So it's a metzias of its own. That's what heter is. If it's a metzias of its own, then maybe because here we're talking about Yisurim, right? Where the Rashi talks about the Isa takes on the identity. But not everyone agrees with the Shlokers that Yisurim and Matlan Zeh. Others say, we'll see in a minute. Others disagree that Yisurim take on the other thing. So when it comes to heter, if it has an identity, then it will be fall into the same machlekes. But if heter has no identity, then B'pashtus, if it has no tzir of its own, it joined Isur and Isur the Roiv, it becomes Asur. Now suddenly it has a new Metzias. But anyway, let's continue. We sidetrack, but it's a very seismic chakira. Okay, let's go back to the Gemara. Shmam the tlachel 3 din for Rishlok. Shmam number 1 is Yisur Vatl. We learn from here that you would think that each one has their own Yisur. Who cares? It's treif. It really matters whether it's pigul or whether it's noises. No. It's not stam treif. Each treif is a different mitzias, and therefore they cancel each other out, like we see right here. They mevatl zeh. Number 1. Number 2, you're telling me that if there's a rove of one of them, let's say pigul again versus the nicer, the nicer is gone. What happens? The meat of the nicer gets flavor. Tam kiikar is giving flavor into the majority, even though it's a minority, but it's still enough, sufficient to give flavor. If price, it doesn't matter because we said that it disappears the moment it's 49%. But it's bottled. It's not here. Giving flavor. Nothing. Also here, now this is a big chiddush. We know already. Look at Makas Shlokish holds Asra Safi. No, you gave a warning. You're not sure the person who evaded. Give a warning in the morning. You said that you're going to do something today. You're going to eat something today, and I tell you in the morning, I'll give you Asra. You better do it. It's Asra Safi because I have to now. I can do an hour. I said all day. And in an hour, I forgot your hasra. Yeah, exactly. And I forgot. So at the time I gave hasra, I don't know for sure you're doing avera. That's called hasra safik. Okay, that's called hasra safik. But over here, the chiddush is you definitely do an avera. If I warn you, don't you dare eat nicer, don't you dare eat pigul. You definitely ate. You ate one of them. One of them is a kazayis. One of them is the right shear. And yet the chiddush is that this is called Hasra Safik because I don't really know precisely what Aveda I'm warning you on. Even though I mentioned both Avedas, I said you dare eat them, pigul, don't you dare eat nicer. But since I didn't know for sure which Aveda you're doing, that's also falls under the banner where it actually learns under Hasra Safik. Okay, Masiv Rav. So Rav asked the question as follows. It says also Isa min chitin umin oides that if you go ahead and you made a piece of dough out of wheat and out of rice, the im yesh but and the question is are you chayim and challah, and then we're going to talk about whether you yotze matzah. You're not yotze matzah with rice because it goes to sirch and it doesn't become only those things which can turn into chametz. You yotze matzah. But if it cannot turn into chametz, like rice cannot just decomposes, then you're not. Then you what do you call it? It cannot be yetzer matzah. But here you have a majority of one, a minority of another. But here it says im yesh bo tam dogon. If it has the taste of dogon, chayav b'chala. I forgot the ruby oidus. You just said a minute ago that we don't care about tam. The tam doesn't make a difference. Here you see clearly the majority is rice. Minority is wheat, but if in the rice you feel the flavor of the wheat, it's like we treat it like bread, and you chayim challah. That's the Gemara's question. And for the Gemara, this is only midrabanon. The Shlok is talking about malchus ma'atoira. Ma'atoira tam is not ki'ikir, and this is only midrabanon. What do you mean midrabanon for the Gemara? Okay, Maseifa. Other years it says you can use this as matzah. That's ma'atoira. Now the Gemara comes along and says the following: Ella. Mean b'she'eina, if it's mean b'she'eina, you can feel the flavor, right? If it's two different items, you can feel the flavor. Then we say, like for example, rice and wheat, two different meaning. And if you feel the flavor in the rice of the bread, then ma'atoida is bread. So you ate some matzah. But time, but meaning when they both have exactly the same flavor, then it's beruba. If they both have exactly the same flavor, then you go after the rive because you can't feel the flavor at all. It's the same flavor. The kosher and the not kosher, or the two different things, are the same flavor. You can never know, and therefore we say what that maybe time. So, for example, when it talks about when the Rishlokis was talking about over there, you had pigul and you had nicer. We're talking about maybe they're talking about the same flavor, the same meat, and therefore Tom doesn't do anything over there. That's what he said. Tom doesn't do anything. Says the Gemara, but I don't understand. I don't understand. Had this been min b'she'eina mina, and you can detect the taste, you say, well, it's awesome. But now the only reason why you don't detect the taste is not because the taste isn't there. You just cannot tell the difference between the two. Why should it be mutter? Let's imagine, like we just learned in the Mishnah, imagine that the whatever, imagine one of them is an Einoi Minoi, and what would have happened if you had the mixture of this min with this other thing? Had it been Einoi Minoi, would you still feel the taste of the Minoi? Then it should be treated like min Minoi, and flavor is flavor. Why? Just because you personally cannot feel the flavor, why should it become suddenly mutter?
Still have the same percentage.
Exactly. So manushach. If it's mahatayda flavor, then imagine the flavor is there. And we learned in our Mishnah that nan. And how do I know you have such a mitzvah? It's called imagine. That nan. We learned in our Mishnah. It's out of biyayin. What happens? The blood of the animals they got mixed up with wine, right? So here the main focus is on the amara, on the appearance. But the appearance is blood, is a wine. Imagine the wine would have been water. Would you still be able to see the blood? Then it's blood. If you can't, you can't. So we see that just because you're pale, you can't see the difference because it's we imagine. My love, we imagine the wine. It's water. So the Gemara comes down and changes the whole shot. Yeah, an amazing thing. What's the Lord know? If it's b'minai, it's always bottle. Tam nothing. There's no such thing as a royin. We don't imagine. Mishnah said clearly. She says, no, you thought the Mishnah Gemara is now changing the whole shot around. You thought the Mishnah is saying the way we learned, and we're going to learn in Mashkan anyway. The way that we thought that the pshat in the Mishnah is, we imagine the wine, which looks just like blood, is water, for example, and then see what would it effect be on the wine, on the dam, on the blood, all the way around. What we're saying is this is not the reason, the problem. The problem is the blood is a minority. There's no blood here. So we treat the blood. This is the outcome. We treat the blood like water, which means you can't use it. Just like you can't sprinkle water on the mizbeach, you can't sprinkle the blood. So this is not the reason. This is not the modus operandi to work out whether you could use the blood. This is what he's telling you. The result is don't use it because it's like royin ki'ilu mayim. When we royin, as if the blood of the carbon is like water, and you can't use water. That's what he's saying here. Totally dry. We imagine the blood of the carbon is water, and therefore what he's saying, you can't use it. The Gemara's not happy. You kind of weird way of saying it. All the Gemara should say is that the blood of the carbon is bottle and can't use it. What do you have to give me a explanation because it looks like water? They don't. Gemara's like a shot. Number one. And no, but this thing that you say that we don't say royin, the Mishnah clearly says you do say royin. And therefore my question goes back. Just because min b'minoi, why don't we say royin? Imagine that the other thing is ein minoi and then see whether it would have an impact or not. Number one. Number two, v'oid, Tanya, it says clearly in the Braisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, royin oise ke'ilu hu yain adam. Rabbi Yehuda is clearly an example, we'll soon see that we look at the other item as if it's red wine. Im dia mareu kosher. Apostle. We say that if what's the case with him? If the water becomes lighter, if it becomes lighter, then it's kosher, and if not, it is possible.
Because the wine is lighter than blood, it'll dilute it.
We'll see what the case is. We'll see the case in a minute. What exactly the case is? Says the Gemara. This is the case. So Gemara answers back. You're right. People who say royin. But not everyone agrees to royin. So machlekes tanoim, and maybe our Mishnah follows this Tana that we don't say royin. Tonight, the Tanya we learned. You have, let's say, a bucket, a pail that is tummy. Sheyesh boy yayin lava, and you have a pail that's tummy. Now, normally you put it in the mikveh. If you put anything in the mikveh, the water joins the mikveh itself. Hashak, everything goes good. The problem is the water sitting it's sitting in a pail. You already have wine there in the pail itself, and you're putting the pail upright into the water. So we need to make sure that enough water. That if there's more than half of the pail is filled with this wine, it's an obstruction to the water of this mikveh to go in. Because you didn't pour out the wine. If there's less wine in there, then you have majority of water in the pail. So that's what he's saying here. You have white wine in this pail, or milk, right? You have white wine and milk, and so therefore you cannot tell the difference between that and the water of the mikveh. What's going on? Is that water? Is that wine? Is that milk? So is there an obstruction here for the mikveh water to touch the inside of the pail or not? With Billy, you put it in the mikveh. So Rabbi Hoilchin Achar Roiv. He says, well, the first Tana says, just look at the Roiv. If the wine that's inside the pail is only 40% of the pail, and 60% now is filled with the water, so you go after the Roiv and say, what? That the water definitely circulated and it's all mikveh water. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, Royin, we imagine the wine is red, the whole way around. Now, this time we imagine if this would have been red wine, what would the water inside that pail look like? It's red wine. If the red wine, as an account of all the water that went inside there, now loses its color, then kosher. That means that what? That it's out. It's been outnumbered by the water. But if not, possible. So she clearly from here that Rabbi Yehuda holds this concept of royin, and the other Tana holds on the concept of and the Rabban don't agree with Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, we don't believe in this concept. You want to know why min b'minay? Why by min b'minay we say beruba? Because we don't believe in royin. We don't believe in royin. The Mishnah clearly says royin, like you proved before. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds of royin. We don't hold of royin. In the Mishnah itself, you have Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Ain't dam b'vatul dam. Nachreim try to work to them. But the point our Mishnah author is Rabbi Yehuda, and we hold other Tana. But we don't say royin. So min b'minay, it goes after roiv. Says the Gemara, but I mean, ask a question. It says elsewhere, if you have a pail full of spayach, full of saliva, and that's thick, it's not like water. And saliva can be an obstruction. It impedes the water from actually touching the pail itself, the walls of the pail. So he says here, the mikveh doesn't help because they have all this thick saliva. That's.
Couldn't think of some other examples. The maple syrup or something like that.
Fair enough, but somehow it's full of saliva. So therefore, it's like it didn't go because it's very thick. It obstructs impedes the water from touching the thing. Mole mechatas. Meiraglayim. What about if it's urine? Now urine is a little bit yellow. We're gonna is royin oise ki iluheimayim. That it comes to tell you that since the urine, we're going to imagine it's water, even though the color is not really water, you can tell the difference. There's a yellow and there's a white, but it's transparent. We're going to treat it as water, and therefore we're going to say hashaka, and we're going to say that it joins the water of the mikveh and everything's kosher. Royin oise ki iluheimayim. We imagine that this is water. So this is here we have the concept of royin, right? And it's like min b'min, they're both liquid and everything else. Mole mechatas. What about you have a pail full of mechatas? Now mechatas is even though the mechatas is something used to retire others, but it itself is tameh. Somebody who's not only somebody who's tameh, mechatas is metayr, but somebody who's torah, the mechatas actually is considered an avatuma, is metame. And you're full of mechatas in the pail, and if you're going to immerse the whole thing in the mikveh, it's a bit of a problem because you can't have any water mixing it with the mechatas, right? You don't have mayim chayim. Any other water ruins it. So mole mechatas. So we say we'll soon explain what's going on here. So therefore, it's not bottle. Ad sheyirbu hamayim al mechatas. That when will the tefillah help for the keli? In this case, that you have to get rid of more than half of the mechatas from the keli, and then you allow the water inside the keli, and it has to be the majority. It has to be the majority. Okay. Now, but in the middle case of Meraglayim, we use the case of royin, right? Because Meraglayim is not really water, but we imagine it's like water. Man, something like this, like royin. Rabbi Yehuda. Right? Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says royin. And yet when it came to mechatas, what did he say? How much water do you have to put in there? Uktani desagile beruba. He says it's enough. You don't say imagine that the mechatas would have been wine and how much water do you need to put in there to take away the color of wine. We don't say that. Uktani desagile beruba. And he says here that's enough with roib. So we see from that what? We don't say royin. Even the one who believes sometimes you say royin holds that you don't say royin. So who is the one that actually says you do say royin? Our Mishnah, you said before, the author of our Mishnah who believes in royin, we imagine that the blood that got mixed into his wine or water and what would it be? He said it was, who was it? Rabbi Yehuda. Here we see Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold up the house of royin. This is his view, this is the teacher's view. And according to this, his Rebbe, Rabbi Gamliel, that Tanya Rabbi Gamliel ain't dam avatul dam. His Rebbe Rabbi Gamliel is the one that says that min b'mino is like bottle. He is very strict when it comes to the laws of bittul that he doesn't even min b'mino. He said they reinforce each other. Ein reik mevatel reik spayachs from a zov that cannot, let's say regular spayachs cannot cancel spayach from a zov, which is tam meraglaim mevatel meraglaim. Even though it's min b'mino, he said min is not mevatel. Since he is so machmed that in the laws of bittul that if it's the same min mevatel, he doesn't. He's what do you call it? He doesn't believe in royin. He doesn't believe in Ryan, but Rabbi Yehuda himself holds in Ryan. So our mission is Rabbi Yehuda, and what we just learned over here is Rabbi Gamliel. Is Rabbi Gamliel. And is Rabbi Gamliel. In Meiraglayim, we do say Ryan like water, but there it's very close to water. Remember, we're talking about appearances here. It's very close to water. So the Ryan of Meiraglayim, as if we say it's like water, and therefore this hashaka is not the same as blood and blood, and you're changing one from wine to water, from blood to water. That's a big change. Rava says, and this is how we pass in Lepoil. What do you mean? We're talking about a case in no. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who holds on min b'minay lebotl, and Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says you do royin, and one are not linked to the other. So every year in Shas we say who's the author who says min b'minay is never bottle. That reinforces us Rabbi Yehuda. If Rabbi Yehuda is the author of our Mishnah by royin, how come by mechatos he doesn't say royin? Why by mechatos he says if there's roy water, that's good enough. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. It's a unique case. We're talking about a dli, we're talking about a pail, shetoichet. The inside of the pail is toir. No, boss. But the gabay tummy, that the outside of the pail is tummy. How can it be the outside of the pail is tummy, the inside is toir? The whole tummy here with the rabbana, that mashkin, we have a rule that tumas mashkin, a chacham geyser, that it should become like a rishon. So mashkin touch the outside of the keli, and one of the dinim is that the outside becomes tummy, but the inside of the keli remains toir. And the handles remain toir as well, because the whole thing is a chumrah with the rabbanan. All you need is a drop of water going inside, and that's good enough. Why? Because the inside doesn't even need tefillah, so that's good enough. Navas, Rabbanan who the gozer, Rabbanan said, no, you have to immerse the entire keli here, and we have to put it in the water. You know why? Because we're worried if we're not going to tell you know what you can do. If we don't say you have to do the inside the keli, put more water, he won't do it properly because he doesn't want water to go inside the keli. If the outside of the keli is tummy, he thinks, oh, well, I could just put in the keli here 95%, but not the whole outside either, because maybe a drop of all you need is one drop of water to ruin the whole mechatas. So you're going to put it in till the rim or a little bit lower. And then it's no good because you have to do the entire outside of the keli. So the Chacham had no brave, but they said you have to have the inside by telling you to put water inside the keli, the entire outside of the keli will become you'll be taivel, but we don't need more than roiv in this case, even though normally we're machma you say roiv, because really you don't need anything inside the keli. It's only the outside of the keli that we need to retire, but we're worried that you're not going to do the entire outside of the keli. That's why here's different. We're worried about the goes of dimul chayis le'rachmanis le'mevatlei and bekiva dikirabuy le'tzarich. And since you have over here majority of the water inside the keli is mikvah water, you don't need any more. But in normal cases, you definitely need to say royin. Rabbi Yehuda is also the one who says royin. We imagine that the other things water. Let's see what even though you're a miyat, if you still have your color, it's you still whatever the halach is outcome is being your original color. That's seen tomorrow in Mitzvah Shem.